Hello, guys. This is Raj. Hope you all are having a great day so far. In this video, we are going to be talking about revising notes, why you might want to do it depending on the class you are in, and how to do this. So, a outline of this video lecture for today. First, we're going to talk about what we've talked about in previous videos about the record, revise, review method of learning in courses and where this lecture fits into that sequence. Then we'll talk about why revise our notes, the purposes of revising notes, and then we'll give you some tips for revising your notes, some strategies. We'll talk about when should you, excuse me, we'll talk about when you should revise your notes. And then we'll talk about how the planning, monitoring, and reflecting cycle fits into this revising note-taking portion of learning in courses. So we've talked about the R3 sort of method of learning in courses, the record, revise, review method. We've talked about before learning from lectures and texts, right? So this is the initial way of learning in courses. Now we're going to talk in this video about the second step, which is to revise your notes. And so, like I've said before, revising your notes should be really only for the most challenging, most difficult, and most important classes that you are going to be taking. You definitely should not be doing this in every class just because we have very limited time in college. And so we can only spend so much time for every single course. And so revising your notes means just improving your notes after first taking them. We'll talk about why we should do this in the really difficult classes if you have time for doing this. But again, this is only for those very challenging classes. And then in excuse me, future videos, we will be talking about how to review for exams, for essays, things like that, which will involve using our notes. And so one reason why it's nice to revise our notes is because when we go back to review for exams, we'll have revised notes where it's going to be easy to learn from, to quiz ourselves with our notes. So first, let's talk about why we might want to revise our notes. So in this course, there are a few really major ideas that I kind of want to get across in terms of how we learn as people, as well as how to be successful in college, right? So the first big idea is that mastering material in courses, which involves having a deep understanding, not just a shallow knowledge of facts, but a really deep understanding of content requires a lot of constant, effortful thinking over a sustained period of time. And as we will see in some future slides, revising notes will be one method of really having us effortfully thinking about the course material over a sustained period of time. Like I've said before, in college, you will need to determine how much time you dedicate to each course to prioritize your time. And so this definitely applies to revising our notes. We should only be doing this in the most difficult classes. And becoming a better student requires forming new habits and breaking old ones, right? So, in this case, this applies to revising our notes because this might be a new habit that you might not be used to doing, right? And so, I think that it can be a common occurrence for students to uh, not look at their notes after they have taken them. And in this case, sometimes that's okay, but other cases, we can have more effective ways of learning and studying the course material by revising our notes and reviewing them in the future, which involves forming this new habit, right? So, um, if this is the case for you, everything in this lecture will also, or sorry, everything in the previous lecture on habit formation will apply to, excuse me, will apply to trying to form this habit of revising our notes. So yeah, now we'll talk more about why we should be revising our notes. So one study of college students found that 50% of these students said that these notes were disorganized and incomprehensible, right? And so, why is that? One reason is because we might not be able to understand what we write. Oftentimes, especially in lectures that last for like an hour or so, It's very hard to, note down everything that the lecturer is saying that's important. And so we'll use shorthands or we'll use phrases that in the moment in the class we will understand, but a week later we will forget. And also we may not just be able to capture every important detail, right? So we might capture a core idea, but the sort of explanation about what this idea means, we may not be able to actually capture it. So that's another reason why it is important to revise our notes if it makes sense to. And as we will see in a second with a demonstration, organizing our notes will improve our learning and our memory in the future. And so I will show you all this with a little demonstration. So in a second, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you in a second a list of words. I want you, and I will give you 10 seconds, excuse me. I will give you 10 seconds to memorize these words in the exact order that you see them in. So I'm going to put a 10-second timer on my phone. I just want you all to memorize these words in order. So here we go. The words are right here, so 10 seconds starts now. All right, now stop. Now I want you all to try and jot down or recall in your memory how as many words as you can from that list. And so try to jot down or recall as many. I'll give you a second, pause the video, and figure out how many words can you remember. All right, so hopefully now you have a number in your head of how many words you remember from that list. Now I'm going to do a similar activity with you. I'm going to show you another set of words. And in this set of words, I will give you 10 seconds to memorize the words as much as you can. Again, memorize them in the exact order that you see them and try to, I would say try to get more words than you memorized in this past attempt. So I'm about to show you all the list of words. Memorize them in order in 10 seconds. So here it is. Okay, time starts now. 10 seconds. All right, stop. So now, with this second list of words, I want you all to now note down or recall in your memory, what do you remember? What are the words? And how many do you remember? I'll give you all a second, pause your video, and count how many words you remember from that second list. All right, so coming back to this, now I want to ask you all, did you better remember the first list of words that was just a random list of just a bunch of jarbled up mess, or the second condition where the words were organized into a coherent sentence that made sense? I think pretty much anybody, everybody that does this exercise will find that this second list where it's a organized list of words that is in a sensible sentence, is much easier to remember than this list of words where they may kind of go together, right? Like we have food, meat, cook, vegetables, hungry, right? Like these words kind of go together, but they're not organized, right? Whereas this second list is organized into a sentence. And so why are we doing this? The point of this activity is to show you all that organization, in this case with a list of words, will improve our memory, right? It's much easier to remember things that are organized, in a way that makes sense with our brain, that's logical, and coherent. And so this applies to revising or note taking because, like that list of words, if we are able to organize our notes, if we're able to do things like better improve the groupings of headers, to add more details, to make the ideas more coherent, with this, excuse me, with this improved organization that's more logical, it's going to make it more easier for us to remember this information in the long term and to form a deeper understanding. And ultimately, for the at least the most important and most difficult classes, that's what we want to improve our performance. And so, coming to this, what are the two purposes of reorganizing or revising our notes? It will first make studying from them easier. We're gonna, excuse me, we're going to talk in future videos how to study from our notes and prepare for things like exams. Long story short, you're going to want to do things like quizzing yourself from your notes. And so revising our notes is going to make it easier for us to do this. And the second reason is in the process of revising our notes, you will actually learn the material better, right? And so in a sense, revising our notes is actually a form of studying itself, which is why it is beneficial sometimes. So now we've talked about the purposes of revising notes. I'm now going to talk about some strategies for how you can do this. Again, in the classes that it makes sense. First, so I want you all to take a second, pause the video, and think about this question. What do you already know about how students can revise their notes? Because I'm sure that some of you all have some ideas on this. So take a second, pause, and think about your prior knowledge. All right, so now we're gonna come back. Hopefully y'all have some prior knowledge, but if you don't, then that's okay. I will give you some strategies for this. So first big thing is to identify what is missing or confusing about your notes, right? So I talked about before that study that said that 50% of college students could not understand their notes, right? And so if you do fall in that category, that's okay. You know, noting down information from like hour-long lectures is already very difficult. And so you can look at your notes and ask questions like what's on this PowerPoint slide right here. So things like, excuse me, can I fully understand what I'm trying to explain in my notes? And am I missing any important ideas? Any important connections are missing? Asking also deeper questions that get to a more fuller understanding of the content. Questions like, does an idea relate to any other ideas that are important, right? So trying to form connections between the ideas is a very good way to form a deeper understanding. You will typically find also that you will find gaps in your notes after drawing the tree diagram. So the tree diagram we talked about in the previous lecture videos and note-taking videos, it looks something like this. And so if you are drawing this diagram that is noting down the important ideas of a lecture, you might find some gaps in between the little nodes or little headings, right? So you might find that there might be some gaps in terms of like the most important ideas in the header or in the subheader, important details, things like that. So after identifying these important gaps, and you're going to obviously want to try and fill those gaps with your notes. In terms of how to go about doing that, you can write questions that can then be answered by questions or instructors, right? So this is where you can go to office hours for the instructor. You can ask them questions through emails, asking them just a simple question of missing an important detail in the lecture. You might be able to ask classmates, and we're going to talk in a few minutes from now. We'll talk about study groups and how that can be helpful for revising notes. So this is one way to revise our notes. Going off of this strategy, another thing you can do is to use materials that the instructor has provided. So things like PowerPoints online. Sometimes the instructor will provide an outline of the lecture that you can use. Sometimes they'll provide the notes. And so sometimes, especially in things like math classes, the instructor might be doing some live writing, maybe some live demonstrations of problem solving with some mathematical equations, and they will post their notes that they write live in class online, right? So using those notes will help. Also things like textbook chapters, text, if that is helpful as well. Using whatever resources that the instructor has provided to you to help revise those notes. Filling in any gaps and making any important connections you can make. Third thing we've already talked about is to find connection amongst the ideas, right? And so again, this is really for, or I should say first, revising our notes, like I've said, is for the very challenging and important classes, right? And oftentimes in these classes, we're going to want to form a really deep understanding of the core ideas in the course. Instead of just having like a surface level memorization of facts where we can't really talk about the meaning or the significance of ideas. And so one way to form this deeper understanding is to try and note down connections amongst ideas, right? So an example, if I go back to World War II, let's say I don't know why I always talk about this, but the causes of World War II, right? And I want to have a really deep understanding of why World War II happened, the causes. And let's say one lecture in this class we learned about Germany and how it helped cause World War II. And another lecture we learned about Japan and how it helped to cause World War II. If I want to form a really deep understanding of the causes of this war, I can ask myself questions like, how did Germany, or how was Germany similar to Japan? How was it different to Japan? Maybe how did actions in Germany lead to actions in Japan? Or how did actions from Japan lead to actions in Germany, right? So trying to make a bunch of different connections by asking myself these questions, all these different connections between Germany and Japan, right? And so the psychologist Daniel Willingham, which is one of the psychologists that I learned from to make this course, he says in class, get the facts, and then after class, get the connections between the main ideas, right? So in class, right, when we're taking notes, we oftentimes can only just note down the factual information. We can't really note down any sort of connections because that takes a deeper amount of thinking that we just don't have the time for in class. And so after class, when we are revising our notes, that's when we can make these connections of stuff like Germany versus Japan in World War II. And like I've just done before with this example, it can be beneficial to write connections between ideas from different lectures, right? And so it's good to form connections between ideas inside one lecture or one class period or class session, but also expanding that scope to different lectures and class periods can also be beneficial to improving your understanding. And the best way or a good way to do this is by looking at a lecture's organization. So things like drawing the tree diagram, like I showed you all here in this slide and in past videos. This tree diagram, it has at the very top the main topic of the lecture, which is in this case why cook meat. Then one level below the main topic is in this case three of the most important main ideas, kill bacteria, flavor, and tenderness. And then below these three important ideas are a bunch of supporting details below that give some information about these three main details, right? Or three main ideas. And so when you have this organizational pattern, this tree diagram, then you can more easily look at this and say, what are connections that I can make between these details or these main ideas, right? So, you know, if I'm looking at this from the main ideas perspective, I can look at the main idea of flavor and the main idea of tenderness. And then from there, I can ask myself questions to connect these main ideas, right? So, how does tenderness impact flavor? Or how does, I don't know, how does a low quality of tenderness impact the flavor of our food, right? Things like that. Just to form connections and form a deeper understanding. And to give some more help with this idea of connecting ideas, excuse me, we should also try to be specific about how ideas connect, right? So, in the case of how Germany and Japan were similar and different, right? I should be, in this case, with revising my notes, I should try to be as specific and detailed as possible about the similarities and differences, right? So I should be, you know, I shouldn't just say that Japan was different because they were in Asia and Germany is different because they're in Europe, right? I should be more specific and talk more about maybe things like the differences between Hitler and Japan's leadership and Hideki Tojo, um, or differences about the industry or the military or things like that, right? Just trying to be as specific as possible. Um, So this is an example here. So in this case, in this example, instead of a tree diagram, I just have a very simple, just bulleted list. Um, in this case, it is the causes of the American Revolution. And the American Revolution was when the United States fought against Great Britain to gain independence from Great Britain. And one main reason was because Britain was taxing America without any sort of representation or democratic voice. And so in this example of an outline, I just have a bulleted list of a bunch of causes of the American Revolution. So I have first cause is the Stamp Act, second cause Tea Act, third cause is the Boston Tea Party. And I have just some supporting details for each of these causes. So in this example, on the next slide right here, I will show you all that this is a example of how to revise your notes, right? And so in this case, now I'm trying to write down the connections between these big ideas in this lecture, right? So in this, I think this is in the green arrows that I have here, it points to the connections, the specific connections between the ideas, right? So I write down here how the Stamp Act caused the Tea Act, right? And these are the first two main causes, main details of this lecture. In the other arrow, I say how the Tea Act caused the Boston Tea Party. And this second arrow is an even better example because I have a very specific explanation, right? I have the taxes put on tea, blah, blah, blah. So this is just an example of how from the outline format of like the just a bulleted, very simple bulleted list with headers, you can look back and revise your notes by the looking at the main details or main ideas. Okay, so now we'll talk about another strategy, which is to form study groups and in the study group revise our notes. We'll talk about how to form these study groups, but first I want you all to pause and take a second to think about what do you all know about forming study groups? What are some tips? All right, now we'll come back. We will now talk about how we can form effective study groups. First, why should we form effective study groups, right? And so sometimes you want to do this. I mean, it can be costly in terms of time, and it can be hard to find good people. But if you are able to form a good study group, you can do things like compare how your notes are organized, right? And so if you're able to compare your friends' notes and your notes, you can notice things like connections between ideas, maybe important gaps that the other person has that you have or don't have, or vice versa. Maybe you can notice things like headers, subheadings, important supporting details that you've missed. And so this is why it can be beneficial to revise your notes in a group. And so in terms of how to form good study groups, ideally you want to have 3 to 6 people. I mean, you can do things like 2 members of the group, whatever works with you. But ideally, though, these members are not lazy. They are, quality students. They are committed to doing well. Um, I would say meet once a week. It can be difficult to try and schedule a meeting time for like, multiple people because everyone has different class times and different obligations and responsibilities outside of classes. But try to meet once a week. This way, it's also a habit to revise your notes, which, helps form that habit. And then this is really important is to set clear expectations of what each person should be doing and how each person should contribute, right? The reason we want to do this is we don't want to be in a situation where, let's say the first 2 meetings, everything goes well and everyone has their notes and we're helping each other revise our notes. In the third meeting, um, some students are just lazy and they just don't bring their notes, right? We don't want that to happen. And so just having very clear expectations at the beginning will help prevent this from happening. And one other thing too is try not to divide the work amongst the members, right? So what this means is don't say, for example, for one person to capture information for only the first 50% of a lecture, and then the other person will capture the rest of the lecture's information. Don't do this. The reason why is the point of revising our notes with a group member is so we can have the same notes and compare our notes together, right? So we can look at each other's notes and see what are the benefits and the downsides of each of the sets of notes, and to fill in gaps from that, right? But if one person only has 50%, the first half of the notes, and the other person has only the second half, then we can't really do any comparison. Um, so yeah. I would say another reason why we should form or try to form study groups, not just to revise our notes, but to help us prepare for exams, is because it's oftentimes very motivational to have people that we can look to as like role models to kind of be people that can hold us accountable. And so that's why it can be very beneficial. But on the flip side, you also want to try to avoid people who are not committed to working hard because you don't want their bad habits to kind of bring you down, right? So yeah. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is uh, asking the instructor to help revise your notes, right? And so we've talked about this before, right? So if you have a gap or confusion that you notice in your notes, um, you know, most of the time instructors are going to be very happy to help you. In terms of some tips for how to do this, bring your notes and questions for revision during office hours. You can also, another good time to do this is before or after class, right? So let's say we have a class that meets every Tuesday and Tuesday and Thursday. That's pretty normal. It's every Tuesday and Thursday. On Tuesday, you attend the lecture, you take notes, and then you do not understand the material. Then what you can do is on Thursday, before class, just ask them a really quick question that takes a few minutes, or after class, just ask them a very quick question. Or you can even, if you know that you do not understand the material, you can ask them the same day on Tuesday. Just ask them the same day the question that you are confused about. When you are confused, don't ask the instructor to explain the entire content, right? So for instance, if the lecture is on the quadratic equation, which has like, I don't know, like multiple steps, like three, four, five steps, do not ask the instructor to explain every single step of the quadratic equation because that's a lot, right? Instead, just ask them more specific questions about what you are confused by, right? So, I'm confused about the third step of the quadratic equation. And in this case, it's also helpful to know or to state what you already know, just so the instructor knows what you already know and what kind of gap in your understanding that they need to fill, right? So saying something like, I understand how to do the first two steps, but I'm confused about how you got your third step, being very specific there. Um, so yeah, summary of the 5 tips is on this slide. So find a connection between ideas in your notes within a lecture and between lectures. Identify what is missing and incomprehensible from your notes. Use the instructor's resources to help revise your notes and fill in those gaps, things like outlines, PowerPoint slides, um, and also to ask questions from your instructor. And the last big thing is to compare and revise your notes in a study group if applicable. All right, now I'll talk about when you should revise your notes. So, like we've said, um, it should ideally be on the same day while the information is still fresh in your memory. The reason why is um, it can be easy for us to forget the areas of confusion or even why we are confused about what specific details we have questions about. So I do it on the same day. Try to work it in your schedule, however it works. If it's, the next day, if that's what you have to do, then that's okay. But like I've said though, only be doing this on the most important and difficult classes, right? So if you have 5 classes in a semester, I would expect to do this revising our notes, maybe 1, 2, 3 courses. Just depends on how hard your classes are for that semester. Okay, we've pretty much already talked about this. And so the last thing I'll talk about is the planning, monitoring, and reflecting cycle. So with this cycle, we want to try to apply this to pretty much everything we do because this cycle is how we get better at pretty much anything, right? So we want to plan, we want to prioritize what strategies we want to do. Then from this plan, we want to monitor our strategy usage. And the biggest part for me is to reflect. So reflecting anytime we try to do any sort of new habit or take up any new strategy is to reflect. Ask yourself, was I successful in doing this new strategy to revise our notes? Why was I successful or why was I not successful? And you can also ask yourself, does revising my notes help, right? And maybe you'll find that some aspects of revising your notes help, but then some don't, right? And so in that case, with the reflection, it's helpful to know what is effective and what's not, so you can then just prioritize on what really is helpful to you. So yeah, that is everything for this lecture. If you have any questions, please ask me in WhatsApp or another time. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.